Naomi, you'll need to postpone your law school graduation party. We're using that weekend for your sister's engagement gala instead. Honestly, it's about time you contributed something meaningful to this family. My mother said it while reaching for the bread basket, the same way she might ask someone to pass the salt. Across the table, my older sister Tessa let out this little laugh through her nose, the kind she'd been perfecting since we were kids. My father kept his eyes on his steak. He hadn't looked at me directly in maybe 3 years. I didn't argue. I didn't even set down my water glass too hard. I just opened my wallet, pulled out 3 20s for my own meal, slid them under the edge of my plate, and stood up. The chair made a quiet sound against the hardwood. I walked through the dining room of that overpriced steakhouse my father loved, past the hostess who smiled at me like nothing was wrong, and out into the parking lot. I sat in my car for maybe 40 seconds. Then I started the engine and drove home. They thought I was sulking. They thought I'd come around in a few days, the way I always did. They didn't know that something inside me had just gone very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that has teeth. Have you ever had a moment in your life that mattered more to you than anything and watched your own family treat it like an inconvenience? Tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one, I promise. My name's Naomi. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I was what therapists call the scapegoat child, which is just a clinical way of saying I was the family ATM with a face nobody wanted to look at. It started before I could even articulate it. I was 9 when my parents handed Tessa a brand new Schwinn for her 11th birthday, the kind with the tassels on the handlebars, and that same week told me my hand-me-down sneakers were fine for another season because we're not made of money. Naomi. 6 months later, they paid $4,000 for Tessa's pageant gown. I remember sitting on the staircase at night doing the math in my head, even though I was 9, because I'd already learned that math was the only honest thing in our house. By 13, I was babysitting 4 nights a week. I gave my mother $60 every Friday, cash, in an envelope, for groceries. We had plenty of groceries. The money went into a savings account I wasn't told about until I was 18, when I found out it had funded Tessa's first year at a private liberal arts college in Vermont. The same year I was told to apply to the state school because we have to be realistic about your potential. Honey, I went to the state school. I worked 40-hour weeks at a coffee shop while taking 18 credits a semester. I graduated summa cum laude, took the LSAT, scored in the 97th percentile, and got into a top 15 law school on a full merit scholarship. My parents found out about the scholarship through my aunt. They never asked how I was paying for any of it. They just assumed I was, the way you assume the sun will come up. But none of that. None of the years of envelopes and silence and birthday cards that arrived a week late. None of it prepared me for what they did with their money for Tessa's engagement gala. The morning after the steakhouse, I sat at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and pulled up the county property records. I don't know what made me do it. Some instinct. My father had spent the entire dinner muttering about gas prices and a leaky water heater they couldn't afford to replace. But he'd also mentioned, almost smugly, that the gala was going to be at the Whitlock estate. The Whitlock estate doesn't do anything under $100,000, so I clicked through the records, and there it was. My parents had refinanced the house, not a small home equity line, a full cash-out refi, stripping out roughly 78% of the equity in a house they had paid off in 2019. My father had told everyone at Thanksgiving that paying off that house was the proudest moment of his life. I kept digging. My uncle works in financial services, and I know enough about the tax code to follow a paper trail when I see one. They'd liquidated both of their retirement accounts early, took the 10% penalty, took the income tax hit on top of it, the whole thing. Between the refi and the retirement accounts, they had pulled together right around $170,000, and the deposit on the Whitlock estate alone was $125,000. I just sat there with a coffee going cold and tried to understand it. My parents were 63 and 61 years old. My father had bad knees. My mother had been talking about retiring for 3 years. They had set their entire future on fire so my sister could have a gala, not even a wedding, just the engagement party. And they had asked me the day before to postpone the celebration of finishing law school so I could help coordinate. Here's the thing I figured out that morning, sitting in my pajamas with the property records glowing on my laptop. My parents didn't just love Tessa more than me. They needed her to be extraordinary. They had been pouring money into the idea of her since she was a toddler, and at some point, the investment had gotten so large that the only way for them to not feel like fools was for her to become spectacular. If Tessa was a star, they were visionaries who'd spotted talent early. If Tessa was just a girl who'd married a rich-looking guy, they were two retirees who'd lit their lives on fire for nothing. And I was the problem. Because I'd built a career without them. Because I was about to be a lawyer on my own dime. Every time I succeeded quietly, in the background, I made them look like they bet on the wrong horse. They couldn't afford that, so they had to keep me small. The fiancé's name was Carter. I'd met him exactly once, at a brunch 6 months earlier, where he'd spent 20 minutes telling me about his wealth management portfolio, and another 15 explaining what a 1099 was, as though I'd never seen one. He wore a watch that I'd later learn was a counterfeit, though I didn't know that yet. He had this habit of laughing too loudly at my father's jokes and then making eye contact with my mother to see if she'd noticed him laughing. He worked at a regional financial advisory firm, mid-level, but he talked about it like he was about to inherit the place. According to Tessa, he was on the verge of being named senior partner, and the engagement gala was, and I quote, a soft launch for his new tier. Those were her actual words, a soft launch for a human being. 3 weeks before the gala, the pressure started. First came a text from Tessa at 6 in the morning. Need you on calligraphy duty. Place cards. 240 guests. Have them done by Friday. I didn't reply. By noon, my mother was calling. By 2, she'd called 11 times. I finally picked up while I was walking back to my office from a deposition. What are you doing that's so important you can't help your sister? I'm working, Mom. You're always working. Tessa is under enormous pressure right now. Carter's parents are flying in from Connecticut. Do you understand what's at stake? My job is at stake if I keep stepping out of meetings to take your calls. Your job, she said. And the way she said it, you'd have thought I cleaned toilets for a living. Your job will still be there next month. This is once in a lifetime, Naomi. So was my graduation. There was this long pause, and then she said, very softly, very precisely, don't make this about you. Not now. I hung up. That weekend, they showed up at my apartment. All 3 of them, Tessa, my mother, my father. I opened the door and Tessa walked past me like she owned the place, glancing around at my furniture with this expression like she was appraising a thrift store. Where's Marcus? She asked. Marcus was my fiancé. He'd been my fiancé for 8 months. He'd met my parents exactly twice, and both times my mother had introduced him to her friends as Naomi's boyfriend, with a little eye roll, as if to suggest that he was a phase. He's at work, I said. What does he even do again? Tessa asked, picking up a framed photo of the 2 of us hiking and tilting her head at it. Construction or something? He's a contractor. He owns his company. She set the photo down face down on the side table. Not on purpose, supposedly, just because she was done holding it. My father cleared his throat. Naomi, we need to talk about your attitude. I crossed my arms. What attitude? Your sister is going through something major. The least you can do is show up. Help with the small stuff. I have a graduation in 2 weeks, I said. I have the bar in 3 months. I have a job. And Tessa has a future, my mother snapped. Carter is going to be a senior partner, Naomi. Do you understand what that means for this family? When she's married into that kind of money, she'll be able to help all of us. She can help you. Don't you want that? I looked at her. I looked at all 3 of them standing in my living room in my apartment that I pay for with my own money, telling me that my sister's hypothetical future husband's hypothetical promotion was the thing that was going to save me. I'll help, I said. Tessa smiled. Big, slow, satisfied. Good. I knew you'd come around. You just needed a reminder. My father patted her shoulder. My mother actually exhaled, like a weight had come off her. They left 15 minutes later, and as I closed the door behind them, I could hear my father in the hallway saying, "See? She just needs structure." She always did. I locked the door. I stood there for a minute with my forehead against the wood, and then I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop. Here's what they didn't know. What they had never bothered to ask. What Tessa, in particular, had been too busy mocking my construction boyfriend to find out. Marcus's company wasn't just a contracting firm. 3 years ago, he'd started taking on commercial work, and 2 years ago, he'd been quietly acquired as the in-house construction arm of a private equity group that specialized in hospitality real estate. They owned hotels. They owned event venues. The Whitlock estate had been on their acquisition list for 14 months. Marcus had signed the final paperwork on the purchase 6 weeks before Tessa's gala. He hadn't told my family because, frankly, my family had never given him a single reason to share anything with them. And me, broke glorified paralegal. My sister had called me at brunch once. Glorified paralegal. I'd smiled and not corrected her. Because I wasn't a paralegal. I was in my 3rd year of law school, yes, but I had also spent the previous summer at a forensic accounting and litigation firm, where I'd done so well they'd offered me a hybrid contract position during my final year. I worked 30 hours a week as a junior forensic investigator on civil fraud cases. My specialty was small to mid-sized financial services firms, the exact kind of firm Carter worked at. I hadn't sought him out. I would never have done that. But 2 months earlier, completely unrelated to anything, my firm had been retained by the board of directors at Carter's company. They had a leak somewhere in their advisory division. Client funds weren't matching reported allocations. They'd lost a major institutional account because the numbers didn't pencil, and they needed someone external, someone the internal team didn't know existed, to find the bleeding. I was assigned to the case under my professional name, which is my mother's maiden name, the one I'd quietly started using for work 2 years ago after a misogynist opposing attorney had decided my last name sounded approachable. Nobody at Carter's firm knew I was Tessa's sister. Nobody at my firm knew I was related to anyone on the case, and I had decided, very deliberately, the day I got the assignment, that I was going to do my job exactly the way I'd do it for any other client. No favoritism, no protection, just math. I'd been working the case for 6 weeks when my mother told me to postpone my graduation. So that night, after they left my apartment, I sat down at my desk and I pulled up the work files I'd been moving through all month. And I looked at them with fresh eyes. Because I had a feeling about something, and the feeling had been getting louder. Carter's client portfolio was performing way too well. In a flat market, in a sector that had been losing assets, he was somehow up 19% year over year. His top 3 accounts were a regional manufacturing firm, a logistics holding company, and a private investment trust. I'd already pulled the standard verifications. The manufacturing firm checked out. The logistics company checked out. The private investment trust was where things got strange. I ran the trust's EIN against the state business registry. The entity existed, barely. It had been registered 18 months earlier, with a single director listed, and the address on file was a UPS store in a strip mall in suburban Maryland. 2 of the performance fees Carter had been paid out of that trust, totaling just under $90,000, traced back through 3 shell entities to a Zelle account I recognized because it was, I am not making this up, the same account he'd used to Venmo my sister $40 for an Uber at my cousin's bachelorette party. He was funneling client money through fake performance fees into his own personal account. I kept going. I worked until almost 4 in the morning. By the time the sun was coming up, I had documented just under $380,000 in misappropriated funds across 2.5 years. He'd been smart enough to keep individual transactions under the firm's automated review threshold and dumb enough to use his actual personal Zelle. He'd also, and this is the part I still think about, he'd sent an internal email about 10 months earlier to a college friend who worked at a competitor. The subject line was, "Lol Friday." The body said, "The compliance lady here is 60 and uses Internet Explorer. I could embezzle in interpretive dance and she wouldn't notice. Closing on the ring next week by W." The ring. The ring he'd given my sister. The ring she'd been showing off at brunch like it was a small planet. I printed everything. I organized it into a binder, the kind with the clear sleeve on the front. I tabbed it. I put the email on the last page because I am, at heart, a person who appreciates a good closing argument. Then I called my supervising partner at the firm. I told her 2 things. 1, I had found the leak. 2, she needed to know that my sister was engaged to the subject of the investigation and that I was prepared to be removed from the case if she felt the conflict was material. She was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Naomi, the conflict is that he's about to be your brother-in-law and you're handing me a binder. I'm not removing you. I'm putting you on a plane to meet with the board on Monday." The gala was on Saturday. The Whitlock estate is one of those places that looks like a French chateau accidentally got dropped in the middle of horse country. There's a long gravel drive lined with old oaks and a fountain in front that I am pretty sure was carved in the 1800s. The night of the gala, the fountain had floating candles in it. My mother had insisted on floating candles. They'd cost $6,000. Marcus and I drove up in his truck. Not his work truck. His other truck. The clean one. I wore a deep emerald floor-length dress that I'd bought for myself 2 months earlier as a graduation present, and my grandmother's pearls, the ones she'd left specifically to me in her will, which had been a whole other family drama I won't get into. Marcus wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way suits fit men who actually pay tailors. We did not look, as my sister would have put it, like construction. We walked in through the main doors and the first person I saw was my mother, in a champagne-colored dress, talking animatedly to a woman I didn't recognize. She saw me and her face did this complicated thing, this little flicker of surprise and then something else, harder to name. She hadn't expected me to actually show up looking like this. Tessa was in the center of the ballroom, in a white gown, because of course she was, surrounded by Carter's mother and 2 of her bridesmaids. Carter himself was over by the bar, holding a tumbler of something brown, gesturing largely. He spotted me. He grinned. He came over. "There she is," he said, "the future Esquire. You clean up all right. Marcus, my man." He clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Marcus did not react. "So listen, I've been telling everyone the Whitlock had a cancellation last minute, and that's how we got it. Don't blow up my spot, okay?" He winked. "Got it," I said. "Senior partner announcement's coming tonight, by the way," he said, leaning in. "My CEO is here. He flew in from Boston, so, you know, big night." "Big night," I agreed. He drifted off. Marcus looked at me. I shook my head, just barely. 20 minutes later, the announcement bell rang. Carter took the small stage. His CEO, a man with white hair and the kind of patient, attentive face that should have terrified Carter if he'd ever bothered to read it, stood off to the side. My parents were beaming in the front row. Tessa was holding her own champagne flute with both hands like a chalice. Carter gave his little speech. He thanked everyone. He thanked his parents. He thanked Tessa. He thanked, weirdly, his fraternity. He did not thank my parents, the people who had liquidated their retirement so he could have floating candles. Then he turned to the CEO and gestured grandly. The CEO walked up to the mic. He smiled at the room. He said, "Thank you all for being here. Before I make some remarks, I'd like to do something a little unusual. I'd like to introduce someone." He paused. "Our firm has been working over the past several weeks with an external forensic accounting team on a sensitive internal matter. The lead investigator on that engagement is, as it happens, here tonight. I think it's important that the room hear from her directly. Please welcome Naomi Hartwell." Hartwell, my mother's maiden name. The name on my work badge. The room did this slow turn, this murmur, this confused ripple, because nobody knew who that was, and then my mother made an actual sound, a kind of cracked vowel, because she'd just figured it out a half second before anyone else. I walked up. I took the mic. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. I said, "Thank you. I'll keep this brief, because the documentation speaks for itself. Over the past several weeks, our firm has identified approximately $380,000 in misappropriated client funds, routed through a shell entity into a personal account belonging to Carter Linwood. Wire fraud, tax evasion, falsified performance reporting. The materials have been turned over to the appropriate authorities. The firm is initiating termination procedures effective immediately, and federal investigators are present at this event to take Mr. Linwood into custody." The room didn't gasp. It went absolutely silent in this way. I'd never heard a room go silent before. Like everyone in it had simultaneously forgotten how to use their lungs. Carter said, "What?" 2 men in dark suits, who had been standing near the side entrance the entire night and who I had assumed were Whitlock's security, walked toward the stage. Carter actually tried to back up. He bunked into the cake table. The cake wobbled. Tessa screamed. "You set me up," Carter said to me, very loudly. "You set me up." "I audited you," I said. "There's a difference." He lunged. I don't know if he was trying to grab the mic or hit me or just run, but he came up onto the small stage and Marcus, who had moved without me even noticing, was suddenly between us. Carter swung at him. Carter, in his rented tuxedo, his fake Rolex catching the light, swung at my fiancé in front of 2 federal agents. They had him on the ground before his fist connected. They added the assault to his list of charges in real time. My mother was crying. My father had not moved. Tessa was standing very still in the middle of the dance floor in her white gown, holding her champagne flute, looking at me like she had never actually seen me before in her life. My parents found me 20 minutes later in the side garden, where I'd gone to get away from the noise. My mother was already in full damage control. Naomi, we have to get our deposit back. We have to. Do you understand? We put everything into this. We have to. You have to talk to the venue, I said. They're saying they won't return it. They're saying because of the criminal conduct, the contract. That's correct, I said. The criminal conduct clause voids the deposit. It's standard at every venue in this price tier. I'd read it again carefully. You have to talk to them. You're a lawyer. Almost. You have to fix this. No, I said. She stared at me. You spent your retirement, I said. You refinanced the house you'd paid off. You did it for a party. You did it for a man you met 3 times because you wanted to believe my sister had finally given you something to brag about. I am not your fixer. I have never been your fixer. I just look like one because nobody else was holding this family together, and I am very, very tired. Don't talk to your mother that way, my father said. First words he'd spoken to me directly in I don't know how long. Then don't ask me to clean up after you, I said. I walked away. Marcus was waiting for me by the truck. I got in. We drove home in silence for a long time. About halfway back, he reached over and put his hand on my knee, and I started crying. Finally, the way I hadn't, in maybe 10 years. He didn't say anything. He just kept his hand there. Carter took a plea. 4 years, federal. He'll serve about 30 months with good behavior. His firm clawed back what they could. He won't be in financial services again in this lifetime. Tessa called off the engagement before he was even sentenced and is, last I heard, living in our parents' basement, which is itself a complicated story because our parents don't really own the basement anymore. The cash-out refinance came due faster than they expected, and between the lost deposit and the early retirement penalties and a few other money decisions I'm not going to get into here, they had to sell the house. They got nothing out of it. Marcus's parent company was one of the bidders at the auction. They didn't end up buying it because Marcus and I had a long conversation about it and decided that would be one step too far. And also, frankly, my parents had earned the right to wonder for the rest of their lives whether we could have stepped in and chose not to. I passed the bar in the first try. I work in litigation now, mostly civil fraud, mostly representing people who got robbed by men like Carter. Marcus and I got married last fall at a small place in the mountains with about 40 people, none of whom were my parents or my sister, and all of whom I love. My mother called me a few months after the wedding. She wanted to know if I'd seen the announcement in the local paper because someone had told her, and she wanted to make sure I knew that she knew I hadn't invited her. I let her say her piece. I let her tell me how I'd humiliated the family, how I'd ruined Tessa's life, how Carter would have been a good husband if I hadn't gone digging. When she was done, I said, Mom, I didn't ruin anything. I just refused to keep paying for it. And then I hung up. If you're the kid in your family who was always told you were the difficult one, the dramatic one, the ungrateful one, the one who needed to settle down and stop making waves, I want you to hear me. Your stability is not a personality flaw. Your boundaries are not betrayal. The quiet life you built without their help is not less than the loud life they built on borrowed money. You don't owe anyone a rescue. Sometimes the most useful thing you'll ever do for a family like that is finally stop being useful. I read every comment. Tell me your story. I'll be here. I've thought about that night at the Whitlock estate more times than I can count, and what I keep coming back to isn't the moment I took the microphone. It's the years that built up to it. Nothing that happened to my family was random. My parents didn't lose their retirement because the world was cruel to them. They lost it because for 30 years, they made the same choice over and over again, the choice to invest in the version of Tessa they wanted instead of the daughter they actually had. They poured money into her not because she'd earned it, but because she was the proof they wanted to show the world. And when you spend 3 decades treating one child like an investment and the other like a creditor, eventually the books come due. That's not punishment from somewhere out in the universe. That's just arithmetic catching up. Carter wasn't unlucky either. He didn't get caught because some forensic accountant happened to be his fiance's sister. He got caught because he chose, every Friday for 2.5 years, to move client money into his own account. He chose to write that email calling his compliance officer stupid. He chose the fake Rolex and the loud laugh and the engagement to a woman whose family he'd never bothered to actually know. I just happened to be the person holding the calculator when the choices ran out of road. What I want anyone watching this to take from my story isn't anger. Anger is a starter fuel. It'll get you out of the parking lot, but it won't get you home. What got me home was something quieter. It was the decision, made over many small, unglamorous years, to be honest. Honest in my work. Honest with my time. Honest about what I was worth, even when the people who were supposed to love me told me I was worth less. I think a lot about the moral weight of just doing your job correctly. There's nothing dramatic about a spreadsheet. There's nothing heroic about reconciling routing numbers at 4 in the morning. But integrity isn't loud. It's a habit. It's the 1,000th time you decide not to cut a corner, even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. That kind of character can't be bought with a refinanced house. It has to be built slowly by the person who lives inside it. And resilience, real resilience, isn't the kind that survives one big storm. It's the kind that survives a quiet, repeated unfairness. Survives being the kid who paid rent at 13. Survives the brunches and the eye rolls and the introductions where your partner gets called a phase. The world will tell you that the loud people, the Tessas, the Carters, are the ones building something. They aren't. They're borrowing against a future they haven't earned. The people building something are the ones nobody's noticing yet. If you're the quiet one in your family, the one being called difficult for asking for the basics, please understand that the work you're doing on yourself in private is the only kind of work that lasts. You don't have to outshine anyone. You just have to outlast the lie they told you about who you are.